When I was 11, my dad had taken me and my younger brother deer hunting on a ranch in Alice, Texas. He had picked us up from our mom's house at 10 p.m. and we spent 2 hours driving to the ranch. When we got there, our grandpa and older brother were waiting for us, unlocking the gate to the entrance. We drove about 10 minutes to get to camp on a long and gloomy dirt road. When we got there, my dad unpacked his and my bag while I helped unpack my little brother's, who was 7 at the time. At 5 in the morning, my dad woke my brother and I to get ready for hunting. I had to take my little brother. I'm not much of a complainer, but when it came to my little brother, he was quite clumsy and noisy. Anyways, our dad walked us to one of the 5 or 4 deer blinds around the property and gave us a quick briefing about gun safety. Now you might be thinking leaving a gun with an 11 and 7-year-old is not the best idea. My dad made sure to put me through a hunting program that included how to handle firearms. Once my dad gave us a briefing, my little brother and I climbed up into the blind. Then my dad handed me my rifle. It was nothing too fancy, just a .22, something suited for a child to use. Not too much of a kick. Once my dad left, my brother and I must have sat there for about 3 hours. After about another 30 minutes, there was some movement in the brush ahead. Out from the brush emerged a 10-point buck and 2 does. My little brother had started to reach for my rifle, which I propped up against the wall. I carefully swatted his hand away. He looked up at me with his face that I can only describe as a mix between annoyance and anger. He slumped down in his chair with tears in his eyes and his lip quivering. I felt bad and I told him that I was sorry for hitting him. I grabbed my rifle and told him I checked to see if I had a shot. He just looked and nodded at me. As I aimed through the scope and had the buck in my crosshairs, the doe's head snapped up from eating the corn off the ground, and so did the buck's. I assumed they must have heard me or my little brother. No, it was something else. Their eyes were wide open, staring at the brush. The atmosphere changed. I've seen this before in documentaries. It was like a switch. The forest, which was booming with insects and birds chirping a few minutes ago, suddenly stopped. I could only hear the wind and occasional breathing from my brother and I and the deers. They say when a whole forest goes quiet, a big predator is about. The only big predators we have this far down in South Texas are coyotes, especially in that ranch. All of a sudden, the deer snapped out of their trance and ran off to the opposite direction from where they came. I sat down my little brother, who had fallen asleep, and propped my rifle against the wall. I double-checked that it was steady and the door was locked with the bolt in and the padlock secured. A few more hours passed and it was late evening. We were about to get out of the blind, but my brother tugged on my arm and pointed at something near the feeder. I looked back and saw something large and bulky on all fours sniffing loudly at the feeders. I assumed it was a wild boar, which are present on the ranch. I grabbed my rifle and sat down in my chair and took aim. Between the fading sunlight and the lack of lighting in the blind, I could barely make the thing out. But as the moon came out, I got a better look at it. There was enough light for me to get a good look at this thing. While I was staring at it, chills ran up my spine. It wasn't a boar. I really don't know what this thing was. It looked like a massive dog at first. It had the head of a German Shepherd, but much bigger. Its upper torso was like a man's, but just covered in dark black fur. Its ears were sharp and perked like a dog's, and its muzzle looked exactly like a canine. Out of nowhere, this thing stood up on its hind legs and started sniffing the air. I looked at my brother, who was white as a ghost with tears running down his face. When I looked back, it was in front of the window of the blind, peeking in. Its sharp, long, yellow teeth dripping in saliva and its piercing yellow eyes. The blind was at least 5 feet tall, and that thing was the same height, if not taller, to be able to peek through the window. After a few minutes of this thing staring at us, it started walking around the blind. Every step was so loud. You can clearly hear this thing circling the blind. It then started to drag its claws across the wooden walls. After 5 minutes of it toying with us, its footsteps stopped. I knew it was still there on the other side of the thin wall because it was breathing really loud. Then I heard a loud thud above us. It was on the roof of the blind. I took my rifle off the safety and took aim at the roof and shot. I hit this thing because it let out a blood-curdling howl before jumping down and quickly running off towards the brush. My brother and I were shook, hoping my dad was on his way soon. A few minutes later, our dad arrives at the blind and picks us up. My brother and I told him about what happened. He told us that we were seeing things and that our eyes were merely playing tricks from the dark. We insisted he check the trail cams near our blind. When he reviewed the photos, he saw one picture with reflected eyes right near the blind. Most people know canine eyes reflect light in the dark as most predators' eyes do. He thought it was a coyote at first, but he quickly realized the eyes were much larger and too massive. We still stayed in the ranch for a few days before we left. Fortunately, my brother and I never had another run-in with it since.